Hi, everyone. Good evening and welcome to Valley Best Shalom. I'm Rabbi Noah Farkas, and I am here teaching my Tuesday night class, which is about Pirke Avot. We take one Mishnah a week and do a deep dive on it. And we are in chapter 1, and we are in Mishnah number 6. And I just want to welcome all of our friends online, both here in the Zoom class with me, as well as those joining us from all over the world. So please, if you are out there in the world and want to say hello, let me know that you're there. And we'll be really, really glad to have you with us. It's nice to see everyone who's on the Zoom with me. I hope everyone's doing well and is making their way through this situation with health and with safety and with hope and uplift. So really nice to see everyone here. Tonight, I'm going to start sharing my screen and I'll show you what we're going to be learning tonight. So tonight we're going to be looking at the value of friendship. Pirke Avot is a wonderful text that has just so many beautiful little nuggets of wisdom in it. And the sixth Mishnah tonight is the one that we'll be studying. And it is one of the most famous lines that you find in Pirke Avot altogether, one that often is associated with this time of year, which is the time of year when we have graduations and ordinations and other types of ceremonies. So this is a very famous Mishnah. And so let us begin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitanu mitzotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So the sixth Mishnah of the first chapter begins, Yehoshua ben Pirchia v'didnai haravi kiblu mehem. Yehoshua ben Pirchia omer, aseh lecha rav v'kaneh lecha chaver, v'havei den et kol ha'adam lekaf zechut. So there, it says, Yehoshua ben Pirchia and Nitai of Arabel received the transmission of the oral Torah from their predecessors, from them. If you remember, the first several Mishnayot are all a chain of transmission. And so Yehoshua ben Pirchia said, make for yourself a teacher and acquire for yourself a companion and judge every person, as a whole person leaning towards their merit. So again, as many of these Mishnayot we find, there are 3 clauses in this Mishnah. The first one, 3 clauses in addition to the transmission. So the first one is to acquire or secure for yourself or make for yourself some kind of teacher, the word Rav, which also means rabbi in Hebrew. So some kind of teacher, and kaneh, or acquire or create for yourself a friend, a chaver. So that's the second clause. And the third clause is to judge the whole person, dan et kol ha'adam, each and every person, with and leaning towards their merit. Literally a kaf zchut. The idea is literally like an outstretched arm of merit. That's what that means. Okay, I just want to speak briefly about the language of this Mishnah, and then that will help us give us some insight into a meditation on what friendship really means. The parallel between the first clause and the second clause, aseh lecha rav v'kaneh lecha chaver, is entirely intentional. Not only is it easier to remember, it becomes a pithy kind of thing to keep on your brain, but they really are synonyms in many ways. The word aseh, or make, oseh, like oseh shalom b'mermav, God who makes or creates peace, right? The word oseh is the synonym for that is kaneh, which means in this language to acquire. In modern Hebrew, the word koneh means to buy or to acquire. But in ancient Hebrew, the word koneh was a direct synonym to the word oseh. So for example, when Eve became pregnant with Cain and Abel, she said, I've acquired, kaniti is the word that's used there. I've acquired. She didn't acquire in terms of purchasing, but she was literally the baby. Her name is Chava, which means life giver. And there she is a creator. She is a co-creator with God. Now, the word oseh and koneh has slightly different connotations, but the word koneh certainly means something more along the lines of more human agency than the word oseh, which could include human agency, but isn't limited to human agency. So that's just, I wanted to point those out, The word oseh and koneh are actually synonyms in very strong ways, even though they have slightly different colorations to them. And then you would think in the third clause, that says, and give or create or have positive judgment toward each and every human being, that would somehow actually have more parallel the first two clauses with the three-word phrases. But it doesn't. It has a completely different structure. The command form there is on the word to be, lihiyot, which means that it doesn't have the same force of creation, but it has more of this force of like forceful being. And in and there isn't a sense of a teacher or a friend or a partner, but it has a sense of every other human being. Okay, so I just wanted to show you the structure of clause 1, which we'll call the Rav clause, clause 2, which is the Chaver clause, and clause 3, which is the general or Kol Adam clause. Now, the other piece of this structure, just before we get to a structural analysis, just before we go into a deep dive, is that when it says make for yourself a teacher, that teacher generally is an intergenerational conversation. That is to say, find yourself a teacher, a rabbi, someone that teaches you, a teacher in anything. But in this case, in Pirke Avot, it really means a teacher about Judaism, about history, about lore, about theology, and how to be a just person. So that's what the Rav is. The Rav Talmid, or the rabbi-student relationship, is considered a sacred relationship. Chaver means someone of the same generation or of the same status that you have. A chaver is a friend, and it is considered to be someone who doesn't have a higher station than you or a lower station than you, although your friend could be more wealthy or less wealthy than you. It's more about your relationship to Torah and to life. So, a friend. And then the third one, which is Kol Adam, which is the most general category, is in many ways considered to be the widest of the three categories. And that one can be of anyone of any generation, rich or poor, near or far, basically any human being. So if you're going to look at that structural analysis again, you'll see it goes from Rav, which is a sacred relationship, to Chaver, which is a parallel relationship, to Kol Adam, which is a general relationship. So it almost goes from inside to outside. So that's the structural analysis. I just wanted to show you that Pirke Avot, the Mishnah itself, is a highly edited piece of work, and it is high literature, and it's meant to be structured in a particular way that not only will you be able to remember it when you read it and be able to remember it in terms of oral transmission, but that you'll also be able to see the sort of these inner dimensions, which include the synonyms, the structure, and maybe how it thrusts out into the world. So again, just to go over the Mishnah one more time in general, Yehoshua ben Pirke said, "Oselecha raz, make for yourself a teacher, kanelecha chaver, acquire or create or make for yourself a companion, a study partner, a chaver, a friend, v'havi dan et kol ha'adam l'chafskut, and with every single person, give them the sense of the benefit of the doubt, more or less." Okay, let's do a dive into what friendship means. Friendship doesn't necessarily mean that everyone agrees with you. Friendship doesn't mean that anyone agrees with you. Friendship can also mean that you have friends on different levels. You have friends that come together because you establish a partnership, that you're working on a project together. Friendship can mean that you are there for each other because you inhabit the same neighborhood or the same city. Friendship could also mean that you actually care about each other's souls in a very deep way, and they become your lifelong friends. There's lots of different words that we use for friends. And in fact, when you think about the social media platform Facebook, your Facebook friends, if you have a lot of friends on Facebook, how many of them are actually your friend versus someone who's just in your network, right? So the word friend has come to mean so many different things, and they serve different purposes. I want to show you a little bit about what the rabbis were thinking about friendship. So this is Avot de Rabbi Natan, which is a commentary on Pirke Avot specifically. We read it a number of times. It's a midrash. And so he says, in Avot de Rabbi Natan, it says, get yourself a companion. Kanelecha chaver. What does this mean? It teaches that a man should get a companion for himself, or anyone should get a companion for themselves who will eat with him or her, drink with him or her, read the scriptures with him or her, study the Mishnah with him or her, lodge, like maybe be their roommates, or reveal to him or her all the secret lores, mysteries of the Torah, and problems of everyday life. So, what is this friend supposed to be? Someone who is your best friend, your buddy, your roommate, your mystical partner, he's on your fantasy football league. Basically, it feels like everything from the inner mysteries of the Torah to the problems of everyday life can be brought up with your chaver. Now, to me, that seems like a really high bar. But for anyone who's ever studied Torah with a particular individual over the course of a year or more, realizes that your chaver becomes your closest companion. And this is to me a very high level of friendship. And then he goes on to say, when they sit together engaged in the study of Torah, if one of them errs in a halacha or in the opening passage of a chapter, or he pronounces what is unclean to be clean, or what is clean to be unclean, or he declares what is forbidden to be permitted, or what is permitted to be forbidden, his companion can, or in the Hebrew it says, his companion corrects him or her. And so whence do we know that when his companion corrects him and continues to read with him, they both receive a good reward for their labor? Because it's stated, and this is now from the book of Ecclesiastes, 2 are better than 1, because they have a good reward for their labor. So think about what this means, okay? He establishes a really high bar for friendship, and then he tests that friendship when you're learning Torah. Have you ever held on to a truth that you knew to be so important, so true, so holy, and then one of your good friends that you've had a long relationship with throughout your life tells you that you're wrong or that you need to correct yourself? So I find this to be a very fascinating way of looking at friendship. It's almost as if, in my opinion, Avot Rabbi Yochanan is saying, when you establish a friendship at the level that he's talking about, someone that eats with you, dines with you, goes on vacation with you, learns Torah with you, talks about the inner mysteries of life and all the basic general junky problems of life all at the same time, when you get to a severe disagreement, and I want to underline this, that when you say that something is forbidden when it's not, or you say something is permitted when he thinks it's not, or when you say something is clean and he thinks it's not, or you think something is unclean and he thinks that it is, then in those cases, when you're at severe disagreement, your friend is not only able to correct you, he's obligated to correct you. And when you are corrected by your friend, when you are put in sort of an objectional position vis-a-vis your friend, you're still rewarded, so to speak, by God for trying and for listening. And even if you come to the wrong conclusion, you are still considered as important as the person who comes to the right conclusion. And that is why he ends with the line from Kohelet that 2 are better than 1, because they have a good reward for their labor. So what I want to say is that one of the greatest challenges that we face as an American community, and even as American Jewish community, is that we are in this second clause of Avot Rabbi Yochanan, that we are very good at criticizing each other and calling each other out for being wrong. When someone pronounces one thing as something that a Jew can say and then another thing that a Jew can't say, or that someone is out there saying that we can stand for this but don't stand for that, and when someone rebukes their neighbor and say, well, maybe that's not necessarily true, or maybe we need to change the way we talk about general life as a Jew or in this political community, that because we don't have the relationship to begin with, the words fall flat. That it's almost as if, as Avot Rabbi Yochanan is saying, that you need the first. When it says, get yourself a companion or create for yourself a companion, build up the layers of relationship first. And if you're able to do that, then you can correct your neighbor. Which is why, for example, just as an example, okay? I don't participate in what's called call out culture or cancel culture, where you just call people out because you disagree with them, or you cancel them, meaning delete their accounts, ignore them, etc. Because if I don't have a relationship with somebody, I don't always feel necessary to just call them out. Now, where that gets a little bit different, of course, is when we're talking about public accountability and responsibility for people who take leadership positions. But when I'm talking about just a general another person who I disagree with, because if I don't have that relationship with them, what does it serve for me to yell at them other than me feeling good that I made them feel bad? Okay, now there are certain lines that I personally feel like you can't cross, and that if you are a misogynist, a sexist, a racist, if you are an anti-Semite, if you're in some ways an anti-Zionist, that those are certain lines that I think that we have to have a conversation about. But I think you have to develop those relationships so that we all become better. Okay. And I think Avot Rabbi Natan is trying to say in so many ways, the first thing you have to do is eat and drink with someone, live life with them, study Torah together. And then when you do get into conflict, you can correct each other without being worried that you're not destroying them as a human being. You're actually trying to make them better. And hopefully the same is when they correct you or correct me. Okay. And in fact, this is in the Talmud, which is our next text, talks a little bit about what it means to have true friendship, where we can hold each other accountable. Okay? It says in Brachot 63b, it says, put yourself in kitot, in groups, to occupy yourselves with Torah. So kita, the word kita in Hebrew we know means classroom, right? Put yourself into a class, into a classroom, or in kitot, to occupy yourselves to study Torah. For the Torah can only be acquired in the company of a chavara, or friendship. This is according to Rabbi Yossi in the name of Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Yossi said in the name of Rabbi Chanina, how may one explain the verse from Jeremiah? A sword upon the boasters, and they shall become fools. A sword is upon those who despise the students of the wise, and who sit alone to study the Torah. And not only this, but they also become stupid, as it is written, and they shall become fools. And not only this, but they also have become sinners, for it has also been stated, and we have sinned. So here they're talking about the culture of learning Torah. You shouldn't learn Torah just on your own. You have to do it in public, so to speak. You have to do it with friends. And here I ask, what then is the purpose of friendship in learning Torah? It is not meant to be just people who necessarily agree with us all the time, but that friendship itself can be found through Torah study, that we all have a common purpose, a common sense of destiny, a common sense of history, and that when we learn Torah together, we become better. And it says those who decide to learn Torah on their own without this, well, that's not a very fine thing. In fact, that makes you a bit foolish. And not only that, that makes you a bit sinful, right? That's what this text is trying to say. That to be a friend is to be someone who learns and is in community, even with people that disagree with us. And that disagreements should never rise to the level of tearing the community apart. And that learning Torah is a good vehicle for developing community, which is exactly what we do at VBS all the time. We run so many classes. It feels like every single day. And when our campus was fully operational before the whole pandemic, which is now almost 3 months into it, we'd have hundreds of people. We're used to having 1,000 people on campus on any given day, many of them learning. And because that is what we were, or what we are, we continue to be as a community of learners. And through our learning, we become friends. There's another little text here that I want to bring up, which literally sharpens the point when it comes to friendship. It's from Ta'anid. Masechet Ta'anid is a masechet in the Talmud that deals with fasting. And not just fasting on Yom Kippur or on Purim or before Purim or even on before Passover. It has to do with fasts that are declared public fasts, because fast was the one way of showing penitence. And here they bring up this really interesting conversation because in the context of Ta'anit, it's all about community strife. There's a famine, there's a war, there's something that you want to declare fast, there's a drought. And so they, in those difficult moments when the community is kind of in a difficult place because of things either internally or externally, they ask then, what is the kind of friendship that you need? And here's just a little quote, a little taste. He says, why does the verse teach iron sharpens iron as a person sharpens the countenance of his fellow? That is to say to you that just as an iron weapon sharpens the other, so two students of the wise, or a chacham, the Talmidei Chachamim, the students of the sages, sharpen one another in the law. And so in Pirke Avot, when it's talking about make yourself a teacher and find yourself a friend, here the image, which I like, is that a keen intellect meeting with someone else who has a keen intellect, and they look over and puzzle over a problem, even if they end up disagreeing with each other, both people become smarter in the process. So have you ever had this experience where you really met someone who makes your thinking better? Not just because they agree with you, but because maybe they disagree with you, but they disagree with you in a way that like lifts you up. That is the kind of Torah study that the rabbis wish for all of us, is that just as iron sharpens iron, sort of two swords scraping against each other, that they actually make each sword sharper and stronger. And so when you think about what it says, get yourself a teacher and make for yourself a friend, these are not necessarily means get a teacher that will teach you things that you already know and won't challenge you. Or when he says make yourself a friend, find a friend who challenges you and isn't just like you all the time, which is one of the biggest challenges that we have, I think, in modern society, that we always like to, all the algorithms that we play with online, all the sensibilities that we have, we try to only gravitate towards people who already agree with us or who already like the things we like. When you watch a movie, underneath the bar when the movie is over, it says, would you like to watch this movie because you liked that movie? And it just kind of trips you through, right? I saw on a article once that 75% of the videos viewed on YouTube were viewed because YouTube put it in front of you, not because you chose it, right? That means like a video ends and the next video starts a second and a half later. And it's because the algorithm thinks, oh, you like this little comedy bit? Then you're going to love this little comedy bit. And their goal is to keep you watching so that they can sell advertisements. As opposed to being challenged, we end up only watching, living in a world that feels like a world of mirrors, where everything reflects our values already, as opposed to a world of windows where we can learn new things. And so here, the Jewish culture values difference and differentiation. And we live in a world right now that feels very kind of separated and of two different kinds. And so my last text for you tonight is the story of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, two men with very, very, very different dispositions that came to be best friends. So this is from Baba Metzia, which is all about interpersonal conflicts. And here we're going to be learning about these two men. The first man is Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan grew up in an aristocratic family. According to the Talmud, I'm not sure if it's in this story or not, but Rabbi Yochanan had long hair. I think it was even long blonde hair. He was more or less fairly pale skinned. He had at least had no blemishes on his skin. He was considered a beautiful man, okay? And he grew up with a silver spoon, and he became a great Torah scholar, okay? His interlocutor and his best friend was a name by Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, or also known as Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish came from a very different world. He was sold into slavery as a young child and became a gladiator. He was a brigand. In many ways, he was a robber, an outdoorsman, very rough and tumble. He wasn't considered a good-looking man. He had sort of that more brutish character about him. and they became best friends. And so this story to me is about friendship. So one day Rabbi Yochanan was bathing in the Jordan River when Reish Lakish, who was living as a bandit at the time, saw him and leapt into the Jordan after him. Saith he, Rabbi Yochanan, to him, "Your strength should be for Torah, and your beauty," he replied, "should be for women." So here he saw this beautiful, long-haired man in the water, and it's not clear whether or not this has homoerotic overtones to it, or maybe Reish Lakish thought he was a woman, or maybe he thought he was a weak man that he could beat up and steal money from. But Reish Lakish, who at that time was a bandit, jumped into the water to try to beat him up. When he realized that he was Rabbi Yochanan, he said, "You're too pretty. You should be your beauty should only be reserved for women, not for men." And Rabbi Yochanan says, "Well, your strength should be reserved for Torah, right? You shouldn't be using your strength to try to steal, rob, hurt other people. You should be using it for Torah." And Rabbi Yochanan turns to Reish Lakish and says, "If you will repent," said he, "I'll give you my sister in marriage, who is more beautiful than I." And Reish Lakish undertook to repent, that he wished to return and collect his weapons, but he could not. So here, again, leaving the misogyny aside just for a minute, Rabbi Yochanan turns to Reish Lakish and says, "If you repent, you'll get a reward." And Reish Lakish decided to repent. Now, it's very telling that in the Talmud, that the man who lived by the sword came out of the river and suddenly couldn't find his sword. And he couldn't find the weapons anymore. This is how their relationship began. It began almost as a crime, right on the verge of violence, of punishment, of perhaps a severe beating, and it ended with, at least this opening salvo, and it ends in conversation. Subsequently, Rabbi Yochanan taught him the Bible and the Mishnah and made him into a great man. Now, one day there was a dispute in the house of study. So here, for years, Rabbi Yochanan taught Reish Lakish, right? The aristocrat teaches the brigand or the bandit or the gladiator, all depending on what version of the story you believe. So one day there was a dispute in the house of study with respect to the following: a sword, a knife, a dagger, a spear, a handsaw, and a scythe. At what stage of their manufacture do they become unclean? That is to say, ritually impure, because all of those elements carry, once completed, carry some level of ritual impurity, and they have to be put in water, basically into a mikvah. That's the question on the table. Of course, the question on the table is never really the question on the table, but that's the question that they're presented with in the Talmud. So, when their manufacture is finished, and when is their manufacture finished? Rabbi Yochanan ruled when they are tempered in a furnace. So that is to say, the last time that they go into the furnace and are cooked, right, when they're finished being beaten and are heated to super hot temperature to harden the metal. Reish Lakish, though, maintained when they have been furbished in water. That is to say, when they're taken out of the furnace and dunked into the water with that big hissing sound that you see that blacksmiths use, right? So then Rabbi Yochanan turns to Reish Lakish and says, "Well, a robber understands his trade, right? You must know this because obviously you deal very, very, very much with all of these weapons, right? You are a robber, so you must clearly know that." Said Reish Lakish to Rabbi Yochanan, "And how have you benefited me, the robber? I was called master, and here I'm called master as well. There I was a master bandit, and now I'm a master of Torah. I benefited you by bringing you under the wings of Shekhinah," said Rabbi Yochanan. I'm the one who taught you Torah, right? And Rabbi Yochanan felt himself deeply hurt, as a result which Reish Lakish fell ill. Here they had an argument. Now, the source of their argument, these two very good friends, you think they were talking about swords and knives, etc., when really what they were talking about are their backgrounds. And Rabbi Yochanan is reminding Reish Lakish of the life he came from, which embarrasses him. And so Reish Lakish kind of lashes out and said, "Well, I'm just as good as now as I was then. And Rabbi Yochanan felt really hurt by that, and of course Reish Lakish felt ill. Now Rabbi Yochanan's sister came and wept before him. Forgive him for the sake of my son, she replied. And he remembered that this is now Rabbi Yochanan's sister, who is Reish Lakish's wife. Okay, they have a child. She goes to Rabbi Yochanan and said, please forgive him for insulting you, because for the sake of my son. And she pleaded. He replied, leave thy fatherless children, I will preserve them alive for the sake of my widowhood. Then if you're going to quote back a verse to me about having orphans, then what about a widows? And let thy widows trust in me, he assured her, meaning I don't really care. And what happened then is Reish Lakish died. Rabbi Yochanan was plunged into deep grief at that point. So they had a deep disagreement. You think it was just over Torah, but it was over their entire background. So all the stuff that's brought to the table when you read Torah in your full self. And they had a deep disagreement. And in the end, I know that you take the magic in this conversation seriously for just a minute. Reish Lakish died, and Rabbi Yochanan was plunged into deep grief. And so the rabbi said, who shall go and ease his mind? Who shall go and comfort Rabbi Yochanan? Well, let's let Rabbi Eliezer ben Pedat go, whose analysis of the law is very subtle, meaning very astute. So he went and sat before him, and on every dictum uttered by Rabbi Yochanan, he observed, there's a baraita, an ancient source, which supports what you say. In which case, Rabbi Yochanan stares at Rabbi Eliezer and says, why aren't you like the son of Lakish? Why aren't you like Reish Lakish? Rabbi Yochanan complained, when I stated a law, the son of Lakish used to raise 24 objections, to which I gave 24 answers, which consequently led to a further comprehension of the law. While you say a baraita has been taught which supports you, do I not know myself that my dicta are right? Thus he went on rending his garments and weeping. Where are you, O son of Lakish? Where are you, O son of Lakish? And he cried thus until his mind was basically deranged. Thereupon the rabbis prayed for him, and he died. So it doesn't have a happy ending. And the story is not meant to have a happy ending because it's not Hollywood. We could change the story. We could make Reish Lakish ask for forgiveness and Rabbi Yochanan forgive him, and they could march off into the sunset together, and we can sing "Oh Happy Trails." But that's not how the Talmud actually works. The point of this story, it's almost Shakespearean in its tragedy. The point of this story is meant to teach us something about friendship. How great it is to have friends who go through with you and love life with you just as much as you do and agree with you. And how much better is it to have friends who respect you, love you, and care for you, and disagree with you on the most fundamental of things. I'll give you an example. Every Thursday morning when we were on campus at Valley Beth Shalom, I would lead Minyan. And every Thursday morning I would have breakfast after Minyan with a group of men, mostly men. And many of them and I completely disagree on politics, especially around all sorts of things. It's not important exactly what we disagreed with, but we all loved Judaism. We all davened together. We all prayed together. We all studied together. And we all celebrate each other's lives together. And we could have the most beautiful davening at 7:30 in the morning and the most vociferous political conversation at 8:30 in the morning. And at the end of the day, when we're all going off to work, we all say, see you next week. And we would do it all over again. That to me is what real community is one that allows us to have certain conflicts of interest or conflicts of opinion, but still support each other and love each other. And Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, who are two very different human beings, came to a place where they were destroyed because they forgot that about each other. Remember, what was the conflict that tore them apart was not about the piece of Torah that was in front of them, but it was about the backgrounds that they brought to the table, and that they were reminding each other of their own frailties, so to speak. So when we go back to this first Mishnah, And it says, make for yourself a teacher, acquire for yourself a companion, and judge every person as a whole person, leaning towards their merit. We suddenly see that the story about Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish fits along the line of the narrative structure of the Mishnah. Because Reish Lakish found a teacher in Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan found a friend in Reish Lakish. But when they stopped judging each other with the kind of merit, that's when their friendship fell apart. And that's why they died. And so you go back to the beginning of the story and you can find it, the end of the story embedded in the beginning. That the kind of teacher that you need is the kind that's going to challenge you and cherish you. And the kind of friend and study companion and community members that you need are the kind that will both cherish you and challenge you. And then the moment we stop judging people as a whole individual and flatten them out and stereotype them and insult them and make personal attacks on them, especially on things which they may not have any control over, is when you lose the merit as much as they've lost merit. And that's when communities are destroyed and synagogues fail and relationships founder and whole nations can be torn apart. And so to go from that negative place to a positive place is that we have to be careful and scrupulous about who we learn from and who we associate with, but not be scrupulous with how we judge other people. And with that, I'm going to end this portion and see if anyone has any questions I'd like to raise. Yes, Arnie.
You can always count on me to say something. This was very profound for me. I kept waiting to hear the concept of listening. And in the last example with Rabbi Yochanan, he brought this other person around from a different life and taught him a different way to think. And I thought, well, maybe at the end, he wasn't listening and he didn't like what he created. And that friendship fell apart.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I mean, Valley Beshalom's had a very, very long and wonderful relationship with an organization called Beit Tshuva, which is a recovery house here in Los Angeles, residential recovery house, right? And the one thing that we try not to remind people who come from Beit Tshuva to Valley Beshalom is of the life they lived before they began the program. Right now, in their recovery groups, when they want to talk about it and their struggles, etc., that's a place for it. But if I see, as we have before, a 6'2", leather vest wearing, tattoo sleeve guy serving kugel on Shabbat Kiddush lunch, I'm not going to sit here and ask him about his whole life and remind him negatively about leaving that life behind for the life he has now. I'm just going to say, hey, thanks for the kugel, have a good Shabbat. And where Rabbi Yochanan went wrong, I think, in this conversation, is that he took the thing that maybe Reish Lakish was most ashamed of in his life and threw it back at him inside the Beit Midrash, in the public forum. And he no longer just disagreed with him about a halacha. Maybe he thought he was making a joke, but it was a very improper one. And he wasn't listening, Arnie, on that level. I do want to just point out one little literature, why I think it's such high literature, is the question on the table about when does something become impure? Is it the moment that it's burned in the furnace or the moment that it's put in the water? Okay. Now that question seems like an inane question, unless you realize that maybe Rabbi Yochanan was referring to the burning of the furnace has something to do with the crucible of learning. And Reish Lakish says, no, it's the moment you put yourself into the mikvah, into the water, which is where he jumped into in the beginning of the story, which brought him from the unclean place of being a bandit or a gladiator to being a rabbi. And you just have to understand the literary texture of that. That what Reish Lakish was saying is that I can take a knife or a dagger and I can put it in water and it comes out clean. It comes out pure. It means that you can take a broken human being, a convict, a felon, an addict, and you can change them. And then if you use that in the background, you realize what Rabbi Yochanan was doing was not just insensitive, but really against rabbinic tradition, totally shaming someone in public. And so Reish Lakish bit back at him. And of course, because of the magic that's associated with rabbis in the Talmud, they became ill. And because Rabbi Yochanan couldn't get over himself and his own ego, the illness he inflicted on his friend ended up taking his life as well. Which, of course, is a metaphor for community. The hate you feel and the hate you spread. You might win today, but you'll lose tomorrow. We all lose because of it. Other comments or questions? Yeah, Norm.
I had a little problem with this Mishnah because I kept thinking back to last week's, and
Okay.
because it talked about this wonderful relationship man to man. After last week, we learned that you can't have that relationship man to woman. Is this sometimes interpreted? Is there a reason that one follows the other, or am I just looking at it too negatively?
Right. Just to recall, last week's conversation said in the second clause of the Mishnah was you're not allowed to tarry in conversation with women because that leads to sex, or it makes you think about sex. Sex is bad. And we talked about how to deal with these hard texts, the misogyny of it all, right? And in this conversation, it returns back to a conversation around men. And again, like I just can't get over the misogyny in all of this, but it's there, and it's there. And I'm trying to maybe transcend it and think about in a very general way. So the rabbi-teacher relationship mirrors in many ways the teacher-student relationship in Greek and Roman culture, which was always centered around men, and sometimes even was homoerotic, which you can look at this Talmudic story and read it that way for sure. So I don't really have a good answer for you, Norm, other than it is what it is, and we're trying to make sense of it. And it's okay to keep it in there and then move on from it. To sort of like say, well, I'll take the best parts of this. Any other questions? I'm just looking to see if anyone online on Facebook has any questions. Ami Monson, who's watching online, says, is it a conflict of interest to have a family member as your chavruta? Well, that's interesting. In some ways it can be, right? I know plenty of husbands and wives, case in point tonight, who are learning together. And that may lift up their relationship and their marriage. But at the same time, like I know that I can't learn with my wife because we are both very strong of opinion. And we would rather not bring that level of discourse into our relationship. So we both have people we study with on our own. And that's fine. So I don't have an answer to you other than if it works for your family, great. But if it doesn't work for your family, great. Right now, Ami, I know your dad is a rabbi and you're almost a rabbi, so there's something special about that too. All right, so what did we learn about friendship? What's the last word on friendship is simply this, before we end tonight, is that friendship doesn't mean that someone is just going to agree with you all the time. It's great to have those friends too, especially when you feel really hurt by the world, right? It's really good to feel that you have a group of buddies or a group of gals that you can, or a mixed group that you can come back to and they'll give you hugs, etc. But the deepest level of friendship are not just the people that we vacation with or have dinner parties with, but people that make us better. And sometimes that can be our partners, and sometimes that can be our business associates, and certainly as a American community writ large, we have to learn how to be friends again. And friends don't mean that we have to agree, but we have to learn how to be civil. And we have to learn how to make each other better instead of just tearing each other apart. And I think that last metaphor from the Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan story is a very apt one for community. That when you sow hatred, the hatred will consume you eventually. Even if you might win the political battle today, everyone loses tomorrow. And with that, I will bid you adieu. And may you have an evening full of friendship with your loved ones and with your community. And I'll say have a great night.
Very good. Bye. Thanks.
Bye.